I have only one right. I don't do
How you guys doing?
not that kind of better than the last and better,
Better than the first day?
Yeah, little by little catching up.
Okay, good. That's good.
Yeah, like lab also was helpful.
Labs are very helpful.
I have any questions. Is it possible if you put data from the lab also?
If I what?
Is it possible like you guys data from the lab? It's very helpful.
I mean, you can ask whoever's conducting it. I'm not there in the lab time, so
When I asked Mr. Hassan, he said I need to talk with Robin.
yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's not supposed to be a lecture, so I'm not sure how recording is gonna help. It's supposed to be group studies and group attention. So, anything else? Any questions? Anything else from the homework? That was pretty straightforward, right? You guys were able to complete it? How many of you guys submitted the homework? Okay, that's perfect. So that's good. As long as you make the submission, that's all that matters to me. That means you're putting some effort.
One question. When we writing like these strings, like length, the other ones, should we write next to it my state? I think it's not reasonable, right?
No, you don't. Listen, it's what makes sense, But the variable name is totally up to you. You know what I mean?
No, we can just write string, then equals. You can do anywhere installing my statement dot string.
Yeah. So,
it's,
but you have to create a variable though. You have to have some variable, not necessarily a statement. Okay. All right. Well, we'll do some of the recaps, like as far as if you can explain me the difference between primitive data type and reference data type in Java. And it's not one-worded answer because we've been going over it for a while. I want you to talk to me for a little bit. Think of someone that has no understanding of Java, right? Let's say your friend asking you, "Hey, what'd you learn?" I mean, not the conversation you want to have, but let's say if he's saying, "Hey, what did you learn?" So let's say you learned difference between primitive data type and reference data type. And now I want you to explain it to me, like you're in a bureau, okay? Or just kind of in your own words. Not try to search for what I kind of explain. It's based on your experience. Because we had a homework and a classwork on primitive data type. We also had a homework on reference data type. So in my understanding, you should know what you're doing as far as your own explanation goes, okay? So raise your hand if you want to explain it. Just 3 people? Okay, go ahead.
The primitive data types, was created like Java. It was inside the Java. Came up with the Java from origin, and also it contains usually whole numbers.
That's fine.
Yeah. Usually, yeah. And reference is created by like Java users like us. The reference ones.
You're on the right track, right? But I'm a little bit more. Anybody else in the back?
Reference data types are more like they're add-ons. They're created by programmers. And
can you give me some examples?
Like the string, the class, the arrays, interfaces.
What's a string?
String is a reference data.
But what is it? What's a string?
It defines something.
Yes.
It's a statement.
Sequence of characters.
Okay, that's good. That's what I was looking
Yeah.
for, right? Sequence of characters, right? Excellent. So you're saying reference, okay, primitive data type.
So primitive data types are those where we assign value directly. Like to the variable we are assigning the value.
What are some of the primitive data types?
Like integer we are giving the direct value. And
What do you mean by direct value?
like we are assigning something to primitive.
But you're also you can also
Over
assign
there,
something to
we
string.
use, like you cannot do in reference data types, you usually we are allocating memory. It's referred to the object.
That's fine. A little bit kind of confusion there. That's okay. You want to try primitive data type one more time?
So, like in primitive data, right? Like we have integer, add, and everything. Here we are assigning value directly to the.
So I'm kind of getting a little bit lost on that word directly, right?
Like
What do you
we
mean?
are assigning the values in
Right.
primitive data types.
Okay, but that's
But over there we are just referring like the allocation, the space allocation.
okay. We didn't talk about space allocation in this class, right? There's a reason for that because I didn't want to confuse you guys, right? Today's day and age, when you're learning programming, you don't have to know everything little about how the memory allocation works, right? We're in a day is like it's a lot of things are abstracted. Yes, is it important to know all those memory allocation and what data types and all of those reference type? It matters if you're kind of going into working on some back-end legacy system at Google or Facebook, like all those, like they need every single things to be, accounted for, right? But most of you guys are not gonna do that. So what I'm trying to say is that let's not go into the specific, because I didn't talk about that in this class, so definitely got it from somewhere else. But just high level, try to understand, right? Try to understand what is primitive data type and what is reference type. It needs to be clear, so then you can define what you want to say. What are different types of primitive data types?
Different type.
Yeah. How many?
Like 8 primitive data types.
Okay.
Integer, long, short, boolean, full, char, and
That's fine. That's okay. Don't worry about the other one.
Numeric or something.
Yeah, no, those are like numeric and non-numeric, and yeah, but that's not the types, right? Those are the 8 types. Did anyone raise hand over there? Okay. What's a boolean?
Boolean to check if the value is going to be true or false. We can use it for, like you said, for example, if the door is open and that the person named the chair is empty, that the person said.
So when we checked for a string, if it's empty, right? Is empty. What do you think that returned?
If we check it, if it's empty, and if it's empty, it's true.
Right. So then that method tells us if the string is empty or not. So it comes back as a boolean statement, right? It comes back as boolean true or false. Excellent, right? So that's good. You guys have to review a little bit more. Primitive is something you kind of deal with numeric. Every time you deal with some sort of numbers, chances are it falls under primitive, but that's not always the case because the boolean is also in primitive, car is also in primitive, right? And then you have the reference. Everything else is a reference data type, right? You have a string, you have a scanner, and then when you created a user, that was also a reference data type, right? Can someone explain what a scanner is? Did anyone use scanner for your homework?
Scanner, you did very
Oh,
good.
okay. She raised her hand real quick. Excellent, right? So you start to be a little bit creative, and whatever you learn, see if you can incorporate that into your code.
why we are going to use this camera?
Okay, that's a great question. Can anyone answer that?
I can.
Go ahead.
I just tried to use it to input values from the users. Like there was this homework that we had where if you enter the age of 3 siblings and then take the average. So then I used the scanner class to take in the values from the user in the console and then calculate the average.
So it's if you need some data, right, and the data can not be static, means constants, right? So think of, okay, now that we talk about constant, what's a constant? What's the
Constant.
difference between a regular variable and a constant variable?
Constant will not change.
Raise your hand, but when I call on you, then it's not raise your hand and just say it. What's the difference between constant and regular variable?
In regular, you can change the information, I mean the value.
You're right.
For example, like your age and then account balance, and then the constant, you cannot change the value. That can be like the routing number and the date is.
Yeah, but those are my examples, right?
That's
Something
what
that, okay. So you try to define your own example so you can really understand what that means. So constant means something that can, like, so the reason we use scanner is like, let's say if you're testing something, what she meant when she was testing the average of her siblings, right? Let's say she wrote the code, and then she also wants you to run it, right? But your sibling's age is going to be different than hers, right? So it only makes sense to have whoever's running the code, they should be entering those values. And as they enter it, we'll keep storing them in sibling 1, sibling 2, sibling 3. Otherwise, you have to go to actual code and change those values, which isn't the end of the world because we're dealing with such a small code base, right? Or think of like thousands of lines. But we're never going to use scanner. Usually, scanner is a replica of a text field. If you look at, when you log into, let's say Gmail, right? You have a username and password. You're entering the data there. So instead of using those two fields, we're using a scanner to take that. Make sense? Right? So it's kind of a bridge because we don't have a UI. We don't have time to build that. That's not what our expertise are, right? So that's kind of, and same thing with console, output, right? We read data from our console because we don't have any other way to test it. So it's just kind of like a testing mechanism. The scanner and also the system out println, to see what's inside of our variable, right? And then scanner is to, not every case you need scanner, only if you need some data inside of your variable, and then based on that value, you want to do some computations. Make sense? All right, good. Any other questions? So we'll do this kind of sessions every now and then, just to kind of refresh our mindset. You guys have to prepare, right? Continue to study, and I don't expect you to remember everything, but you also kind of have to be around that area. All right, so today we're going to go over another reference data type, which is very important, right? So arrays. You can assure that everything that you deal with in software engineering, most of the time you're going to run into an arrays, right? We have an array here, a list of students, right? So you're an individual student, but let's say if someone wanted to find all of the students within this class, that's a list, right? So every time you deal with a list, think of some sort of an array. So list, in another word, consider sort of array. So when she mentioned, what's your name again? Bobby, right? Well, when she mentioned that she was writing 3 different variables for siblings age, sibling 1, sibling 2, that's very tedious, in my opinion, right? What if we had one object that can store all 3 in different positions, right? That is more, it's a better approach, right? So then in that case, she could have just put one variable, think of a single variable named siblings age. And then index 1 will store 1, right? And then that variable can store all of the siblings' age. And then we can kind of go through each one and find out the ones that we need. Because we don't really care about siblings' names in that case. All we care about their ages, right? So long as we have that and we can add all of that and divide it by whatever the number, so it's just easier to compute. So you can think of list of variables with the same data type stored into a single object is called arrays, right? So every time you're dealing with the word list or list of variables, like a list of students, list of computers, list of tables, right? These are, if you want to put all of them into one variable, compress them and put them in one variable, that's what it's called, arrays, right? So let's go over a few of the definitions, and then we'll do an example, and then you'll do a classwork, and then we'll review the classwork and move forward, all right? So an array is a collection of variables of the same type. So this is important in Java, that makes sure that there has to be same type. So if we're dealing with list of computer arrays, right? That object can only, or that variable can only store computers, right? You can't put a tables. Whereas other languages allows you to kind of put different data types. You can put everything into one array, but we don't like messy closets, right? So that's what, in Java it's a little bit more strict. So when you need to store the list of values such as numbers, you can store them in an array instead of declaring a separate variables for each other, right? Each number. So to determine the array, you need to define the type of the element with the square bracket for example, to declare an array integer, so first you have to define the data type, right? So in this case, let's say it's going to be an integer. I'm going to deal with only int values, right? And then followed by a square bracket, and then followed by the variable name, right? So, or in this case, it's array name, but they're all min variable. And then the name of the array is array ARR. The type of the element it will be hold is int. So now you need to define the array capacity or the number of element it will hold. To accomplish this, use this keyword new. We already use this keyword new. New means every time you're creating an reference data type of object, we're creating, except for string. Like I said, string is a special case, right? But except for string, the rest, most of the ones that you're going to see, chances are we are going to be creating the word. We have to create those reference data type by using the keyword new. What new does is it creates a new reference of that data type, and then we can start using it, right? The code above declares an array of 5 integers, but very important thing here is that you see where it says 5. So how big do you want your array to be? So we also can limit, how big or small that we want the array to be. If you know that this value is not gonna exceed 5, right? Think of something like, days of the week, right? As of now, we know that it's not going to exceed 7. So there's no point allocating that array with 50 or 60, right? Because days of the week is always going to be 7. So that's that. So the code above declares an array. So let's say, for whatever reason, we're dealing with siblings age, right? So we can say is 3. So I have 3 siblings, and that's pretty much what I have. And so I don't have to allocate it to 50 or 60. So you're saving a lot of space. So when it comes to memory allocations, these are pretty good way to go about. In an array, the elements are ordered, and each has a specific and constant position, which is called index. So what do we call this? Each of those spaces, you see, is 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes up to 4, right? So whatever I specify here is always -1 because the count starts from what? 0, right? So in this case, yes, we had 5. We do have 5 spots here, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, the count starts from 0, but the length, specifying the length value needs to be the actual length that you want, right? So the count starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So always, whatever the length, -1 is your last value, all right? Sorry, which is your last index. So whatever the length is, so in this case, the length is 5, -1 would be your last index. Because if you try to get index 5, it's going to throw an error because index 5 does not exist, right? Okay, and within this, you have a couple of so elements of an array, right? So whatever that array represents, so in this case, let's say if we are storing computer, right? So let's say Mac computer is sitting here, right? But it's sitting at an index 1. So you can think of, you have this parent variable that has kind of a child variables, right? And based off those child variables could be specify how many do you want, right? So array of elements kind of stores here, and then array of 5 elements, that's your array, and then elements of an array kind of stores here, and then this is the element of indexes. So indexes are, regardless of your array type, string, table, computer, int, right, age, it doesn't matter. The index always going to be starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, and that's always numeric, right? Because that doesn't change. It's the element inside of it is changed based on the data type, right? So the code above declares an array of 5 integers. In an array, the elements are ordered in each has a specific and constant position, which is called an index. And these are constants, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3. If we remove 2, you can say, hey, well, tomorrow I don't need this. We're just shifting everything over now, right? So if we pull this out, then 3 becomes 2, and then this array shrinks down to size 4, right? So index is always going to be constant. They don't change. You can't remove an index. You can remove a value from an index, but you cannot remove an index itself, right? to reference element to an array type of the name, the array followed by index position within the pair of square brackets. So you see how array 2 equals to 42, all right? So in this case, we are storing 42 on this box, right? And how do we know this? We specify the array name, whatever that array name is, we specify it somewhere here, right? So let's say you have the array, and then you're saying, hey, I want on the second index, I want you to store 42. So in this case, we have an array with 5 elements, but only one of them has a value, which is on 2. Make sense? All right. So this assigns the value of 42 in the element 2 as its index. All right. Okay, so let's do a real life example, and then we can take it. Go ahead.
If we need unlimited array, what we can.
For now, let's just understand that we only have limited ability, right? Once we run into the issue of unlimited, we'll figure this out. Okay, it's a different approach. So we did the example with the int, but let's do a one with string. So first, you need to specify the data type, right? In this case, let's say I want to store list of cars, right? Let's say you're working for some sort of a dealership, right? And you need to have a list of cars, right? Car dealership usually deal with cars, right? So let's say you specify square bracket. Well, square bracket tells the compiler, hey, I'm dealing with an array here, right? So that's what it is, and then you specify the name. Usually, arrays, variable names are plural, right? It makes sense, because it's not storing single variable, it's storing multiple variables. So therefore, make sure your naming convention is not a car, because it's not dealing with a single car, it's dealing with cars. Now, you can look through it and find the car that you need and throw that into a single variable. That's a separate question, but we'll get there. But for now, this is what we're dealing with. And then equals to what? A new string. And let's assume that this dealership has 3 cars, right? Okay, and then we want to start storing cars. Cars 0 equals to, I don't know, cars 1 equals to cars Okay. So you see how I went up to 2? What? No, but here we are string is the, it's a good question. The string is the type, data type we are using. We are not really creating a string here. We are creating an array here, right? But the array, you see how square bracket is? So ideally, you would have said, well, Mohammed, you should have probably said something like array and then new array and then the data type is string. So it's a little bit simplified, right? So instead of using the word, what they're using is the square bracket, right? So the square bracket tells the compiler that we are dealing with an array, and the data type that we are dealing with is string. So we are not really creating an object of a string here. We're creating an object of an array with the data type string. Okay? So if we were to do, one second. If we were to do, like let's say,
just number, it could
table, right? And it will be table. So let's say we're dealing with tables here, right? So we're really not creating a table here. We are really creating what is called an array with the data type table, okay? And then as you store them, you go here, right? But if you wanted to create a table, you would have do something like this. Table, I don't know, name equals to new table, right? So in this instance, I'm creating a table, right? Well, array is it's a different type of a data type. It's not your traditional regular value, so that's kind of the approach it takes. What's up? 2 questions. I think you had a question in the back.
Yeah, can you not use integer instead of string?
I could use integer, but look at these data types. These are string, right? So if I use int, Honda is not an int, right? If I was dealing with a number, I would have used an int. But in this instance, I'm not dealing with a number, right? But if we go back to our PDF, in this case, they are dealing with a number for some reason, right? So that's why they decided to use int. So tomorrow you may deal with buttons, right? So you need to have the button data types, right? Because you're dealing with a link, right? That's what you have in the web page. You have to store all the links into an array and then look for the link you're looking for, right? So it depends on the data type, right? It's not tied to one data type.
Right. Would you be able to find the integer
But what would I need an integer here?
if you want to find it?
What do you mean?
Instead of the name, if you want to find a number, could you do that?
But I don't have numbers here.
For example, car 0, car 1,
Let me see what he's going at. What is it?
For example, car 0, cars 1 or 2. If
Right, so but these are indexes, right? So yes, you can find which index is storing BMW, right? And sometime we may have to find that and remove that, right? Maybe that car is sold. If the car is sold, but I can't just delete BMW, right? I have to find how many BMWs I have on the list, right? And based on that, maybe one of them will remove it. So yes, if you're asking if I can find which index is storing BMW, yes, we can find that. Was that your question though?
Yes.
Okay. So it's when you say numbers, I'm lost. We need to start using the keywords like index. So this is indexes, right? And these are your values. So when you create a variable, you have 2 things. You have your index, right, which is kind of the position within the array, and then you have your value. Along with, you also have your length. How long do you want your array to go? Okay. As we go into a little bit more advanced, we're gonna figure out a way to, make the array expandable, right? So it can grow and it can shrink based on the data you have within your dealership. For example, because you might say this is annoying, right? Because what if I have 5 more cars coming in tomorrow? Do I have to change this value to 8, right? Because then that has to accommodate. Yes, we can do that, but there's a better way to handle that. But for now, we're kind of learning at the early stage of what an array is. Okay. All right. So once we do this, let's say if you wanted to find the size, right? Let's say this is very simple code base. You can say, well, this is 3, we don't have to count. But there are functionalities out there, right? So we can say int, and then we say size equals to, you call, and then we say what length. Makes sense. So just be careful. We don't do that, right? This is for method, and we're going to learn that. In this case, this will tell me how long, how big this array is, right? And then we can say, length is what? Size. So similar to how you've done, you guys, similar to the length we done for string, you can kind of do it for here, but this is slightly different, right? Now you're not necessarily finding the length of a string value. You're finding how long is this, and how big this array is. So the length context is different compared to the length when we did it for string, right? And when we are doing it for here. It's just like conversation, right? You can use the same word that can mean two different things and two different conversations. So even though it's a length here, but it's a different, it's what it's trying to figure out here is that how many elements do I have or how big this array is, right? And this value pretty much gets it from here. So let's print this out. Well, we are printing it out actually, right? So let's see if it works. Okay, so the length is 3, right? So also, let's comment this out. So you see how we print out Audi, right? So you had that was sitting on index 2, but what if I did 3? Okay, that's a good guess. Excellent. Anybody else? But I didn't get an error here though. You see how an error is not here, right? But if it will let me run it. You get an exception, right? So if you're trying to store something that is outside of the array, -1 is good. In JavaScript and some languages, it comes as a -1, right? So you're not wrong. But in Java, we actually get an exception, and we're gonna learn how to build exception, use exception, handle them, and do all of that stuff later. That's way later. But right now, all you have to understand is if you specify, you cannot go outside of the boundary. That's bottom line. All right. Now I want to see if you can do this. Here's a class work. I want you to convert BMW to all lower cases. Okay, well, just hold off, right? So when I print, right, I want to see something like that, BMW. So let's see if you can figure out, because we were able to access a specific index, right? So I want to see if you can convert the index number 1's value to all lowercase, right? Because it is a string, all lowercase, and then print it out to the console. Okay? I want you to convert BMW, this index number 1's value, to all lowercase. So you've done that. I just want you to kind of see it, if you can kind of combine the array thing and get it done. From online, do you have any questions?
You didn't start with the public static without that code doesn't work.
All right. Done? Okay. Chances are it's working. Okay. I don't have to see it.
I don't know.
Did it print? Yeah. Good. Excellent. So you don't have to show me this one, right? We'll go over it real quick, but I'm sure you guys are getting it right. Because you have error somewhere else. You see? You gotta fix the error that's inside of here. And you created a class within the class. You see how you have the class here? You have another class. You can do that now. Right? You should do like this. Just single class, not this. Can we delete this? No. I want you to use it from
you to get the value from the array. You create a new variable.
All right. So I think you guys are getting it. Is that good? So what we have to do is simple, right? We'll say 1 dot 2 lowercase, right? It's just because once you get this in here, right? Once you say cars 1, that means it already became a string, right? Because I'm saying, hey, whatever's inside of that, now it's stored here. And I'm just kind of converting that into a lowercase, right?
I did different.
You can do it different ways. So you can say name, I don't know, right? Or my car. And then you can say cars
Yeah, I did that.
1 dot to lowercase, right? So it's a little bit nicer. And then you can kind of just print your card, right? So ideally, that's what I was kind of, yeah, it's okay. So as soon as you did this, what you're simply doing is you're looking, whatever the value inside of cars index number 1 is now being stored into this variable. But since these are string data type, now it became just like any other string, right? It's kind of like, this is what it's doing now, right? BMW. And now once you say, hey, wait a minute, I want to do this to this. And now anything that you did over the homework, you can do with this string, right? Because now it became a string. So because we're dealing with a single entity at that point, not multiple entity, right? We pulled one of them out of the array, and now it becomes a single variable. And once it becomes a single variable, so when you're doing coding, you have to do a lot of those things. So you might be saying, well, Mohammed, how am I going to know which index has a BMW in it? Well, that's the next chapter, right? Once we learn how to do looping, comparison, so you'll go through each one. As soon as you find a BMW, you put it outside of that array, right? Create a new variable, and then you do and then come out of that array, right? So you will learn how to do those things. It's not easy, but one step at a time. So that's that. That's what I was looking for. All right. Next thing I want you to do is a very simple one. Is I want you to create an array for all the months. So I want you to create an array that stores all the months. And when I print the list of months, right, then it should tell me the size of that month should be 12, right? So just, it's a very easy exercise. The only thing I want to get out of it is that you're getting comfortable with the syntax, right? That square bracket thing, so you're not completely lost. So create an array, and then we'll take a break after that.
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
I want you to create an array for months, okay? You see how we have it for cars? I want you to do the same thing for months.
Can you short form or?
It doesn't matter. Deepak, are we good with online? Okay.
For how many months? All?
Yeah.
All right. It's a string. Okay. And now you can kind of just storing them. So it's a good question. So the size is going to be 12, but it's always minus 1 because of 0. Alright, so we go up to 11. But if you put size 11, then you're losing a month here. Okay? Because it's whatever the size I specify is minus 1. Okay? Right? And you can kind of go on with this. Up until any questions?
Is there any way, like, you do not write like 12 times months, like one time?
Well, you have to write it.
You have to write it? Like 12 different
No,
times?
there are different ways to do it, right? I mean, you're never going to write this manually. You're going to use a library. We're going to get there, right? But for now, guys in the back, please. So what we're doing here is that, yes, this is what you have to do. That's the requirement, right? How we simplify it, that's a separate question, right? But do you understand at least this piece? Do you understand how this is working right now? So that's the important part. Simplifying, or we'll do it eventually. But since you mentioned it, let's try one thing. So let's say you're dealing with days, right? Which is also kind of constants, right? It doesn't kind of change. So we can just do something like this and use a curly brace, right? And then we can say Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So this will do that job, right? So you don't have to generate the value. So every time you're dealing with the array that you know it's not going to grow or shrink, right? Then it makes sense to do this one, right? Because we're not specifying whatever value that we know it's going to go in array. When you declare an array, when you declare the array types and array names and all of that, you can kind of just specify the names after that, right? So that's the only, but there's a disadvantage is that you cannot, like this one, if you can easily kind of go there and change the value and then add that, right? So it doesn't matter which approach you take, as long as you know what you're doing, that's all that matters. We're not going to use this approach anyway. This is just for learning purpose.
Just have a question, like how do you know when to use the curly brace, like curly braces,
That's a good question. Like, so for example, in this case, it's fine, right? Because you know days are not going to grow.
Yeah, but even though the months are not going to grow, so we just put them in.
That's fine. That was the next part of that class exercise, right? So first, you just have to kind of learn one bits at a time, right? So now that you know, if I were to tell you to do months again, you probably would take this approach, right? So it totally depends on where what your scenarios are. If the array is never going to grow or shrink, maybe write it that way, right? But either way you go, no one's going to penalize it because we are not going to use this approach at all, right? We're going to use more advanced approach down the road. So it's going to be much more simpler, but this is where when you go to an interview, these are the ones they give you. You cannot use the libraries to solve your problems, right? So we have to learn it at this level. Then it's easier to learn from that.
Okay, so when we do like the string 7, so the index automatically will
Yes.
do it like 0 Saturday,
Yes.
1st Sunday. So
Yeah. So Java will handle that. Okay. So again, as soon as you do the curly braces, they're doing some computation under the hood, right? To figure this out. That's not our concern, right?
We can put a string, curly brace, and we can put it like 7.
What do you mean?
Give limit.
Here?
Yeah. No here. After the string.
Here?
No down. We put a limit here.
Yeah.
We can put it here.
No, we don't want that. The whole purpose of this is that we are specifying this directly, right? So the whole purpose is not to put the limit. We want to kind of declare it as we're creating the variable. Okay?
If we print the days, it's gonna come after like all the days name, or nothing gonna come up?
If you print days, yes. If you print the days, but that's not how we print arrays. We have to look through each value and then print them. Okay? But yes, to answer your question, if you wanted to print this out, we have to do a little bit more work. We're not there yet. Okay? We can print each indexes, but we're not there to print the entire array.
So is this thing like one single array?
Yes, this is an array just same as the way we did this ones. But this ones requires a little bit more work because you have to manually put different indexes on that. But this is also more descriptive, in my opinion, right? Because now if you wanted to move them around, it becomes a little bit harder for you, right? So if your array is going to kind of continue to shift, then it's not as visible. But again, what I'm trying to tell you is that this is not going to be a fine. You're never going to see your data, right? So that's kind of the first thing. All your data is going to come from a web page. So when you look at the end product, you're never going to see any days. Or even if you were to deal with days, you're not going to manually write them. We're going to be using some sort of libraries to get them, right? But just for sake of understanding, what you want to take away is not to inspect the entire arrays. This is what an array is. Why is it being used? Those are the questions. Those are the important things you want to kind of understand, right? Syntax-wise, we can figure this out. You can Google things out. You're not going to get stuck. Fundamentally, if you don't understand what an array is, that's a big problem, right? So does everyone understand what an array is? If we were to talk about array, next class. So when I ask you what an array is, I want you to describe it in a way that anyone can understand. I don't want you to say like one word here, one word there, but completely explain it. Hey, array is a collection of a variable with the same data type, or something like that, right? So that someone can easily get full understanding of, even if they don't have a programming knowledge. All right? Okay. Any questions from online?
Hey Mohammed.
Hey, how's it going?
So question. So when you do like cars.length or basically use any method after dot, how do you know like to use like the brackets at the end or not use brackets at the end?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to learn about that later, like maybe in like 2 weeks. So one is an attribute, one is a method. So it's whatever is kind of available to you. So these are all of those stuff is kind of specified on JavaDoc, right? If you look into arrays JavaDoc, it will probably specify somewhere. But at this point, you don't have to worry about that because we're gonna learn how to build them. So when you come back to this in like a week or so, it's gonna make a lot more sense than me explaining it right now. All you have to understand, hey, for arrays, I'm not putting a bracket, right? For string, I'm putting a bracket as of right now, right? But then a week or two later, the explanation changes, and you'll get a better understanding of that.
Okay.
All right. So again, like a lot of the stuff is kind of like a puzzle, right? Some parts are gonna be a little bit unknown, but if we go on to explain those, it's gonna confuse you more, right? So we gotta take one step at a time. What you want to take away from right now is that what is an array and how does an array work? Why do we use them, right? That's it. All right. Any questions from this side? Good. Let's take a quick break, and after the break, we're gonna go start with operators. Yes, I'm recording and now. That's good. Thanks for reminding, though.
Which were same. Where do you transfer? If you if the switch to nothing, it comes to nothing. If you overcase, it means change course.
Okay, so in Java, I mean, we have been using them all our life, right? So we just have to refresh that. It's a very easy topic, but I feel like we need to just quickly go over them. All right. So in Java, we use operators and variables to create expression, right? And with expression, we can build logics and algorithms, right? So a lot of the operators are such as arithmetic operators that we're used to them, like addition, subtraction, multiplications, right? So every time, like if you're into finance, like or anything like that, you have to do a lot of those computations, so you have to use them. Also assignments. We already been assigning using the equal sign, right? So that's an assignment operators. Comparison, right? If something is equal to something else, so you're comparing something, and so we'll learn about comparison operators, and then you have your logical operators, right? So I just want to kind of run through these topics because it's not too crazy, but just to kind of like a refresher for us, like how does all those operators that we have been learning since grade school applies to in our coding standard, right? And in coding context, where do you use them, right? So that's that. All right. The very first ones that we kind of want to go over. I had this here. It's obviously this automatic operators, right? So you can do, for instance, plus, right? So if you use plus, you're doing an additions. If you're using a negative signs, it's subtractions, multiplications, right? A divisions, a modulus, right? Are we like, I don't know if you guys still remember this, but like, do you still remember what that means? Raise your hand.
So it's basically if you have 10% and 2, it will be 0 because there is a 0 left. Like if you have, for example, 8 light bulbs and the container can keep only 5, so basically there will be a
I like the first example. I like the first example a lot. Right?
Excuse me. Can you share this picture?
It will go into your entire thought process after today. You don't need the image, but yeah, that's something every now and then I'll show an image. Doesn't necessarily means like it's super important. Right? It's just easier to explain it. But if you want this, definitely I can send it to you. But now let's go back to that example of percentage. You want to try it again? I know you know the answer. I just want you to get used to explaining
For
it.
example, we have 2 boxes and the box can contain only 5 light bulbs, but we have 12. So we can put only 10 light bulbs in these 2 boxes.
I understand that.
and 2
I
light
understand
bulbs
that.
in the-
But how do you find that? What kind of mathematics do you have to do to find that?
So 12 divided by 10 minus
Okay, so you can. That's fine.
So it looks like there is that and instead of 75, so the remainder will be 5.
No, if I divide
5 divided by 2, then yeah, the remainder is going to be 5.
No, 0.
no, that's also going to be
That's my- oh.
right. So it's a reminder, right? So let's say if I divide 10 by 2, what's the remainder after that? There's nothing left, right? So that's what we're trying to figure out, right? So now let's the same number. If I divide 10 by 3, what's the remainder?
1.
Right. All this modulus does is it gives us the remainder after the division, right? You're correct, right? The original answer is that way, but from a programming context, that's how we figure out what is the leftover, right? So this comes very handy, right? So when I give you a task and say, hey, you have a number stream of 1 to 100. I want you to find me all of the numbers that are divisible by 2 or the numbers that are divisible by 3. So now, I mean, you can just write something like this and loop through it. Once you learn how to looping, you're going to do a lot of cool exercises, right? And once you get there, you can use modulus to kind of help you out a lot, right? If you divide something by 2 and if it doesn't result into a remainder, then that's kind of it's an even number, right? If it's not, then it will be an odd number. So that's how you can figure those stuff out. But most importantly, like let's say, someone set up some rules like, hey, when you're earning money, right? So like let's say someone say, hey, whatever the remainder after the division of 100, the rest of the money, like if I have a remainder after some calculation, I want that money to go into another account. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of different ways, context that you may have to use this. So I know this is something we learned, probably forgot, right? But this is a refresher, right? So every time you divide a number by another number, whatever the remainder value is, that's your modulus value, all right? Increment and decrement. These are also very popular ones, right? So you see how you do a plus plus, consider a equals to 10. So in this case, what plus plus does is it just adds 1 to your existing value after, right? Does that make sense? So in this case, it's just saying like 10 plus 1. Instead of saying that, when you use plus plus increment operator, it will just add 1 to it, right? And then same thing with decrement if you want to start counting down. So let's say you want to do a countdown, right? From 100 to 1, you can start subtracting value after your execution. So if you want to create a timer, think of it like a timer, right? And it's to expire every 10 seconds. So it's going to start counting down, right? Say, hey, 10 seconds, and then 9, 8. So after each execution, we can kind of keep counting down to 1. So this really doesn't get used by itself. It's always kind of tagged with a loop, right? Every time once we learn how to do loop in next class, then it's pretty much easier to understand that, better understanding of this. All right, plus equals addition assignment, right? So you can say a equals to a plus 10, but you can also do a plus equals to 10. It's kind of a short for that long version of this, so it's the same thing. Same thing with all the other ones, so we don't have to go crazy about this. But these are your arithmetic operators, nothing really crazy. We can go over a few of those examples, for example. So let's say int x equals to 10, int y equals to 2, right? So we'll just print it out. We won't store any value. So we'll say x plus y, right? Obviously, we know how to do those, but that's kind of how it works. Right? So the one that we were talking about earlier is the remainder one, which is reminder. Right? I will say this out. Let's comment this out. say x modulus y. Right? It says 0. But if we change the y to 3, the modulus should come back as 1. You'll see it becomes really handy to do a lot of computations, right? To get your logic working. All right, so that's kind of how you do the same thing with, if you were to do subtraction, you use this. For multiplication, we use the star, right? For division, we use the single forward slash, right? All right. So I want to talk about a little bit more on the pre-increment and post-increment, right? So we understand that there is these two increment operators, but they can come up front of the value, and they can also come after the value. What I want to focus on, front becomes very less for the amount of work we are doing, so I don't want to confuse you too much. What we're going to be working on is a lot of post-increment, right? So pre-increment is used when you want to use the incremented value of the variable in the expression, whereas post-increment uses the original value before the increment. So even the definition can confuse you itself, right? So we're going to be talking about the post-increment most of the time. So post-increment pretty much it loads the value of the variable in the memory, then increments the value in continuous reading of expression. So for example, when do we use a post-increment? So let's say you have an int age equals to 1, right? And every birthday add 1 to age, right? So like let's say we written a code where we track your birthday. So we look for a current date, right? So we say, hey, is current date equals to, I don't know, April 1st, right? If the current date is April 1st, then that's when Mohammed's birthday is. Let's increment 1 to it, right? So you might say, well, Mohammed, you could have just done this. Age equals to age, whatever that age is, and then we'll say +1, which is fine, right? Nothing wrong with that. But we can simplify this, right? By just doing this. So this is kind of the equivalent of what I just did, right? So after each value, we're resetting it, right? So it's nothing really crazy. So it's just adding 1 after your variable. Make sense, right? So you can also subtract value. For instance, let's say for some reason I want to subtract 1 from an age, right? And you can kind of just use decrement value. So I may tell you, hey, you have a number 1 through 100. I want you to count down, not count up. So if you wanted to count up, you're going to be using plus plus. You're incrementing something. If I wanted to tell you to, hey, I wanted to do, so it could be like an inventory in your store, right? Or most importantly, like let's say you're working on a retail application at Target, right? Let's say you're a software and test automation engineer at Target, and you need to test some sort of an inventory. So if someone buys something, the value has to come down, right? So that's when you're going to be using decrement and increment. So we're just learning a lot of bits and pieces. We just got to put them together, and it takes some time to understand that. So don't be very impatient, right? Because we're not really seeing a real product yet, right? But we'll get there before you know it. All right, so I want to kind of pause here as far as increment and decrement goes. And what is that? It's going to first add 1, and then it's going to then subtract 1, right? So it's just going to pretty much stay the same. No, there's no loop here, so it's not going to. You're confusing me. Okay, there is no loop here. So if there's no loop, it's not obviously it's going to keep after adding in one, subtracting one, and then it'll print that age. Right? So first we added one and then we subtracted the same one. Right? So technically this is pretty much what it did. Age equals to age plus 1. Right? And here what it did is age equals to age minus 1. But this looks much simpler, right? Don't you agree? So that's kind of the whole purpose for this. All right. I want to focus on relational operators. So relational operators are, what are they? So if you have two equal signs, right, that means you're comparing two values, but numeric values, right? Yes, you might say, well, even for string, you can do this, but under the hood, it might work sometime and it may not work sometime. So if you're ever going to compare two string, I want you to use what? Which method? Equals, right? Did anyone try compare? Yeah. Okay, it didn't work, right? So it's kind of compare was kind of built around some sort of technology around that, right? So it's kind of looking for a memory space allocations, right? So one thing you want to take away, if you're going to compare numeric value, I want you to use two equal signs, right? If you use single, that becomes an assignment operator, right? So the compiler doesn't understand that. When you do two equal, it knows, hey, it's trying to compare two numeric value. If you're going to compare, like I say, like a string, use the built-in method called equals from there. If these are two equal, true if x equals y, otherwise it's going to be false. So in this case, if we were to compare this, it's going to result into what? False, right? Because x is not equals to y. And then also if you want to check something is not equals to, right? So if you want to kind of see, hey, I want to make sure x is not equals to y. So use the exclamation mark followed by the equal operator, assignment operator. So, just replace one of the equals with the exclamation mark and it will pretty much make it not equal. So in this case, if I were to say, is x not equals to y, right? That will come as true, right? So it depends what you want. You want to mess with it true or false, all depends on the context, right? And then if you want to obviously greater than, you will use x is greater than y. So in this case, x is greater than y, right? If we go back to again, our x is 10, y is 3. X is less than y, and then x is greater than equals to y. So when you do greater than equal, it doesn't make the 10 inclusive, right? So it's kind of, when we say it's not including this value itself, right? So when we do x equals to, x is greater than or equals to. So if as long as if one of them is true, then it's fine, right? But when we say is x is equals to, then always it has to be. So if we say x is greater than y and x is 10 and y is 5, so now it says any number from 11, 12, 13, right? We are not including the actual value. So if you have to do that, say x equals to, x is greater than or equals to y, then it'll be fine, even if 10 is included on your computations, right? Same thing with less than, x is less than equals to y. Again, these are the stuff we should have known already, right, from in our math classes. But it's just to kind of get a little bit of a refresher. So that's that. So I'll just put it in here for your example purpose. And now we're going to do another classwork, unfortunately. Let me see if you guys can do this one. And try not to communicate. Try to like focus, right? Try to do it yourself. Try not to ask anything. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you finish it or not finish it, but just see if you can be laser focused and really focus on the problem and try to solve it yourself. If you're communicating and someone is helping you right away, I think you're hurting yourself. So just give yourself a little time to like really understand what's going on, what you're trying to do, and that's okay. And after 10 minutes, you ask for some help. But at least for 10-15 minutes, try to like really mess around with it, because we're gonna eventually go over this. So create age variable. Keep in mind, these value results into Boolean, right? So if we were to do, so let's say a Boolean is a some garbage like that, right? So you can just do something like this: x is greater than y. So this is going to give me true or false. Okay. So I want you to see if you can kind of figure this out. So all of those relational operators, they're going to result into a Boolean result, right? True or false. So that's your step one. So create two more variables, one called isChild, another one called isSenior, and don't write if logics, because that's not what I want you to do. I know some of you guys have some experience with those. I just want you to give me how you use this relational operator, right? And then for print both values. All right, take your time, and let's get this done. Any questions from online about the task? So you're creating three variables. The first variable, you will store your age. Second variable will tell me, is this a child or not? So it should give you true or false. Third variable will tell me, is this a senior or not? So I can come, if you print out those three, or if you print out three, first it should give your age. Second should tell me if this person a child or not, right? True or false. And the third should tell me if this person is senior or not. So I could come back as false, true, false, false, true. I mean, nobody's a child or senior, so they should both come back as false. All right. So everyone who runs a code, your answer should come back as false, unless if anyone is 65, right? Which I don't think.
But usually it's a y, so it's supposed to be my age, y supposed to be.
Yeah, but I don't know your age, right? So the code should tell me that, right?
No, my question is child is supposed to be y.
What is it? No, that's fine. What's your question? I want to clear out confusion, so you're not confused on the test.
X and y, right? So, for example, it's supposed to be y.
Get rid of x and y.
Okay.
You're creating a new variable. You're creating a new variable called my age or just age, and then you're computing with age itself. All right. So you're saying is age is greater than or equals to or less than or equals to 7. Or is age is greater. So age is what you're dealing with. Get rid of x and y. X and y is just for example purpose.
plus 10, plus 10.
Plus plus 1. It's 4 plus 10.
H.
No, there is a symbol like this. Like a plus plus is 1. You can just use this way if you plus it plus 1. You can't use if you add more than 1. Just if you, it means just
Equal. Because it's 7 1. Equal 1. Yes, but it seems similar. Yes, instead of writing 765, I gave it a name. I gave the variable name child. We just write down the value of 765. Like that.
you got 1.
I have both. I have both.
Which is 3. Okay.
This my age.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
We just throw this up here. 3. No result or
That's fine. 2 is fine. Yeah. Yeah. Good work, Nemo.
I have 4 for. That's good.
What is it?
I
4.
have false.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's review the work. Okay. So very first thing, what we wanted to do is say int age equals to what? Let's say this is, I already have an age here. Okay. So that's that. The second thing that we wanted to find out is calculate if his age, if they're 7 or under, right? So we'll say boolean is child equals to age is less than or equals to 7, right? Because 7 or under, right? So therefore we need to make 7 inclusive, right? So you could have probably say, 8 and then just get rid of that, because in that case the count starts, but it's not readable, right? Yeah, some certain things like you can make it work, but it's also when you're reading this, how does it sound, right? So I feel like when you read something like this, age is less than or equals to 7, that's kind of what the requirements wants us to do. All right. So then finally you do another one. Boolean is senior equals to age is greater than or equals to 65, right? Maybe you have to do some sort of calculations for health benefits or this or that, whatever may be the case, right? So all of those, at that point you have to find out if it's senior, then they're eligible for health, right? And all those computations can follow by. But it all starts from some sort of a Boolean expression, right? And then finally you can kind of just print out it's child, and then it's in there. You can add more text here for descriptive purpose, but that should pretty much do the job. Does everyone understand? Okay.
How would you make if age more than 7 and less than 65?
We're not doing that yet, right? We're gonna do it.
Okay.
All right. But for now, we are just dealing with a single result, right? Single expression. We can combine multiple Boolean expression to result into a single expression. But for now, we're just doing a single one. All right.
Because I tried to make
Yeah, that's we have a logical ones. We're gonna get there a little bit. All right, but then there's a new type of operator. It's a very cool one. I like this one a lot. It's called ternary operator. All right, so what this is, if a person is older than 65, they are senior, right? I want you to maybe have, let's say they enter some sort of age into the app, and based on the age, we want to display something back to them, right? So if the person is older than 65, they are senior, otherwise they are considered adult, right? So you can kind of go with this approach, or you can write some if-else statement, right? But there's a ternary operator expression. You can do it in a single line. So let's say we already have an age, right? So we can use that age, and this gives us a status, right? Status equals to age is greater than, older than 65. We use a question mark, right? Followed by senior, and then a colon, followed by adult, right? And then if we print out status, okay. So here's my question to you. You see what this line is? That's what this code is doing for us. If a person is older than 65, they are senior, otherwise they are considered adult, right? So what we're saying is, hey, I want to get some sort of status, right? Based on status, I may want to do something else later, right? But that's the second part. But the step one, we have to get the status out. So we can do something like this, age, because we need to find out if they're older than 65, right? So if age is greater than 65, so anything from 65 to 66, 67, 68, and I'm asking a question, so to speak. If this is true, if this results into true, it's going to give me what? It's going to store senior into this variable, right? If this becomes false, let's say if this is false, in our case it is, I think, right? In our case it is false, then it will store adult into your status object. Does that make sense? But you can only do with these two objects. I mean, it's either or. If it's true, you want to store a certain value into that variable, and then if it's false, because see, when we did this, we kind of had to do this because there was two different computations, right? But in this case, it comes very handy. Now, you don't have to go back and change everything into ternary operator. I just want you to be aware of this operator when you're dealing with it. No, you're not redefining Boolean. You're still dealing with Boolean. It's kind of, instead of writing, like, if kind of like that, right? So instead of writing all of that, we can pretty much just do everything into one line, right? I know from first hand it may look like, oh, it's a little more confusing, but you're going to continue to use that because it's just more convenient, right? But what you really need to understand here is I'm talking about this operator, right? You don't have to, whenever you see this code base, it's not, some people call it, oh, this is short for if else. Not necessarily. It's a ternary operator to control your logic. When it's true, you can kind of control it. If it results into true, what do you want your code to do? If it's not true, then it will print out these values. It can be string, it can be int, it can be boolean. No, because then it doesn't know, right? Because again, boolean comes with only what, true and false. The third one doesn't exist for us at all, right? So in that case, yes, only when you have something to do with, like, if you want your code to do something after true, or if you want your code to do something if it's not true, which is false. Make sense?
So why are we not using Boolean instead of string status?
Here?
Yeah.
Because
but Boolean status.
because these are your data types, right?
Oh yeah.
So if I wanted to use Boolean, I would have to say true, right? And I would probably have to say false here, right? And then maybe change this to Boolean. Make sense? So it depends on data type.
If when you use the int, say,
Same thing. Yeah, if you're dealing with an int, that's fine. But in our case, we are dealing with a string, right? Because maybe for some other reason we need a string. Maybe we want to do equals to something else, right? So, but that's the subsequent steps. We cannot think about every possible way this can be used. But current requirement is for us to give us a status based on their age, and it can be in two possible status, either senior or either adult, right? But when you write this line of code, you're gonna get a little bit more respect than writing an if-else kind of way, right? Because one line is doing the job that a 6-liner would have been doing it, okay? All right, but one thing to take away, that this is the ternary operator. All right, let's continue. I need the charger now.
please can you send me?
Oh, yeah. So logical operator are logical AND operator is called 2 n% when you combine two of those. That means, like, let's say if you want to have multiple Boolean statements to be true for your result to be true, right? So let's say I have to have X amount of money on my credit card and iPhone has to be available at the store for me to purchase an iPhone. So the two conditions had to be true, right? So the iPhone had to be available, right? As well as I had to have an X amount of money. So if you wanted to combine both of those to be true, then you know how can we do that? So that's when you use something called logical operators, right? So you can combine two of those, and not just two, multiple, like 2, 3, 4, X amount, right? And then we can also, so in this case, let's say if you have those two conditions that we talked about, iPhone being available in inventory, and then also you have the money for it, right? So you have to have the operand first one, if it's false, and one of them is false, then always the return value would be what? False, right? So in this case, everything would pretty much be false, right? So the first condition, if both are false, I'm getting a false. The second line, if the second condition is false, first condition is false, then entire thing is a false, right? Same thing with the third one. That finally, only way this will work if the both condition is true, right? And so that's when you want to use n% to force the compiler, the code, to understand that, hey, both condition has to be true for me to make this work. And then you have logical OR operators, right? So if you're dealing with, okay, well, long as one of this condition is true, I'm okay with it, right? So like, let's say if iPhone's available, I don't have the money, that's fine, I can get it, right? But I have the money, I don't have the iPhone. It doesn't make sense, the logic-wise, but if you wanted to do something like that, then you can definitely use the OR percentage. As long as one of the condition is true, it will result into true, right? So it's kind of the opposite of the other one. All right, so let's do this in code, and then we'll get better understanding. Is So let's say I have two values, right? So let's assume if the username is correct. So we all kind of familiar with the login credential, which is going to be one of your first assignment, maybe next class or next week, which is to build entire login system, right? So when you think of is username is correct or not, so let's assume we're kind of we're hard coding it, right? So we're saying username is correct, which is true, and then we're saying is password is correct, not just false. So that should result into is login correct. In that case, login correct should be coming to as a false. So if we were to so in this case, we need both conditions to be what? True. So we need to use n% to do that, right? So we can create another value called is login correct and equals to is username. So the only way it will be if we have is username has to be correct as well as the password needs to be correct, right? And then now if we do is login correct, it will come back as what? Right? Because one of them is false. But so let's assume, you know what, as long as one of them is true, I can get them in. So in this case, you will use, right? So in this case, you can say, well, as long as either the left side or right side, if either one of them is correct, we can get them logged in. All right? So it just totally depends on your scenario, and don't stress too much about this stuff because eventually we're gonna build this out. And then if you want to so like let's say if you want to kind of like flip this login, so if it's true, if you want to turn it into a false, and if it's false, you want to turn it into a true, you just have to put exclamation mark, right? So you see this thing? Let me just do this one more time. Alright, so the login comes in as false. So let's say if you wanted to turn that into a true, right? You want to flip it. So one way to do it is we can just say is login correct, right? And just do this. Now in this right now today you might feel like, hey, you know, what's the point? Why don't I just do computation against false, right? There might be a lot of scenarios and we get there in the next example. But if you want to flip something, then you will kind of use the exclamation mark, right? So that's the whole idea of it. Don't stress too much about this right now. Our next class is going to be a little bit more detailed. All right. Any questions? A lot of stuff, right? Okay. We're going to stop soon. I'm looking for the homework stuff I wrote somewhere. Alright, let me find the homework. I put it somewhere, I can't find it. we're gonna build a temperature calculator, right? So this is what we want to do. And I'm going to build the first half, and then for the homework, you're going to build the rest of it. Converting temperatures from Fahrenheit to Celsius, or Celsius to Fahrenheit, so Kelvin to all of that. So you're gonna have some work for that, and don't Google these answers because it's not going to help you, right? So just be aware of that. Let's find out where these calculations are, these formulas. Yes, it's actually very easy. I know you're thinking probably hard, but it's not. So we have this, right? So if you wanted to convert Fahrenheit to a Celsius, this is the equation we have to use, right? So in our case, it will be either a double value actually. It will be a double value because it can come in decimals, right? So we need to make sure they're in double value. So you create a variable here, and then you do this computation, and then that's that. And then that will speed out the number. So let's do this together, and then for homework, you can do other ones like Celsius to Fahrenheit, or Celsius to Kelvin, or Kelvin to Fahrenheit, and Celsius. All these combination of like, sorry? No, for each one of those, it's different formulas, right? So you have to do that. All right, so let's do, I'm going to remove this stuff. Create some space here. And it's not a homework that you have to submit. It's just for your practice reason. So the homeworks that we assign on Mondays, it's not going to be too big because I want you to kind of digest what we learn here. Sorry? No exam. So Thursday we're going to go over it, right? But I want you to be independently working on this, right? And Thursday it's going to be more extensive homework, so you get the Saturday help, right? So I don't want to assign something a little bit more than you can kind of take, and then you get stuck and you're not getting any help, right? So Monday's homework is going to be a little bit light, but at the same time, that's the homework we'll review on the next class, all right? So this is your temp calculator. So we'll set double, and then we'll just store Fahrenheit somewhere. Equals to 32, right? And then I'll just put a comment here is 32 in Celsius is 0, right? Excellent. And 32 in Kelvin is 273.15K. Okay, so that's, if I were to, so I want to create, if someone's answers, if someone were to kind of get a Celsius of this Fahrenheit, we should give them the value, right? If someone wanted to get the Kelvin of this Fahrenheit, we should give them the value. So this is where we need to kind of just dump in the formula into our code and let that work for us, right? So that's the whole purpose of this. So we'll say double. Make sure you're doing double. If you do int, it's going to round it up to the nearest number, right? So, so we'll say Celsius equals to. We're gonna put a parenthesis here because we want this part to get done first, right? We all need this stuff from math class if you remember it still. And then 5 divided by 9, right? So that's kind of the math that gives us the Celsius. So if you print out now, and then we say Celsius, in theory we should get 0. right? So that's good. So far, so good. So let's do the Kelvin one. And let's look into the formula for Kelvin. So Fahrenheit to Kelvin. So let's look into that one. So whatever this thing is, let's put that in. So 60 Fahrenheit plus 459.67. But you see what I'm doing here? I'm just dumping the Fahrenheit. We could have taken this Fahrenheit from a web applications, just like how they're doing it, right? So if you go here, I think they have a button somewhere, right? Or if you go back to Google, think of like entering this value, right? If we want it for 65, it's in 18 Celsius, right? So we can take any data in our so under the hood, they have the same stuff written somewhere, right? It's nothing really crazy. So what we want to do, we want to replicate the same calculation. So we'll do Fahrenheit. We want to do Fahrenheit to Kelvin. All right. So let's do this one. 459.67. So we'll do double, and then we'll say Kelvin equals to, first number will be Fahrenheit, right? Whatever the Fahrenheit value is plus 459.67, and then times 5 divided by 9. Actually add some space here. That's it. It will store us the Kelvin for that Fahrenheit value, right? And then sound out Kelvin. Any questions? Right. So if we print this out, we should get like 273. And I'll share this code online. So let's do for homework. We should do okay, we didn't do this one. Okay, we just did these two, right? So this is your examples. So slowly we start going to get like some fun stuff, right? So you can relate to real life. All right. So just this create 4 more variables to solve those problems, and that's it. Any questions? And continue to go revisit some of the topics that we kind of talked about today. Any questions from online? Right. If you finish real quick, then just again more review is better for you. And next class we're gonna start doing some cool stuff. All right.
When we do homework, we need to use static variable, or
just the way I have it here.
You can use scanner.
Or like where you're taking the value? Yeah, I think you can use scanner here. That's fine. Okay. All right. If you guys anyone have questions, you can stay back and we can talk for like another 10-15 minutes. Online, if you have any questions, raise your hand, and that's it. I'll see you all on Thursday. Thursday, right? Yes. So meantime, let me just assign you this, send it to you. Homework, and this will be your code.
And also, can you send us the link for formula?
Yeah, you could probably Google this and find it.
You're sending all this in Slack, right?
Yes, I'm gonna send it right now, dude.
Okay.